Just wait 2 minutes. Nothing's rushed. Very good morning, everyone. I think it's time to start. We have a beautiful panel this morning on an extremely relevant topic entitled Fueling Development, the State between Industrialization and Financialization. I think indeed it's one of the most important topics of our time. You all know that the US has decided to really cut its aid for development. This is going to have, and it's already having a large impact around the world. You may have seen in the news that some, predicted and predicted catastrophe and came up with some figures. Maybe 14 million people are going to suffer, if not die directly from the US cuts. Again, to take a potential source, it might be less, might be more. In any case, it has a big impact. And unfortunately, the US is not the only one. This is a trend we have seen for many years. And at the same time, we have to bear in mind that aid has always been criticized for its, relevance and also its unsaid or subconscious bias and other objectives. So today we are going to discuss a number of related topics from industrialization or the return of industrial policy with Professor Alvarez-Zarate, and also the role of a number of banks and other financial instruments globally. But before we start, I would like everyone to introduce himself or herself briefly. Because as I said, we have a number of wonderful experts, and I'd like to give the floor first to Professor Alvarez-Zarate for a short introduction on himself and what he does.
Thank you so much, Leïla, for putting together this panel. I've been a practitioner lawyer for since 1990. And I've been working on trade and investment, trade at New York knowledge that have my family. And then, as many of people that have more or less my age, I turned to invest. Now I'm a litigator, also a professor of investment, also the time. Anyway, the issue that I will talk about here, which is industrialization policies. I just have a couple of ideas that I want to share. I want to share it from a very clear and direct point of view, from the law side. And I will tell you this story as I saw it. As I saw it in the industrialization process of Latin America. And I think around the world was more or less the same. We had some strong industrial policies in the 50s, 1950s, so on. And for Colombia, it worked relatively well because we formed small infrastructures for cars or some domestics, and we had something. But after in the 80s, when we weren't members of that, we started being members of that system in 1980. And when we went to the GATT system, the policies around the world started to change to neoliberalism. So people, and I was young, and I believe that open market would be the answer to many things underdeveloped world that we were living in. So open market, the opening of the markets would work. The state was not efficient because there were lots of industries or sectors that depended on the state that they could be utilities and some lands, so on ports, roads. So privatization was one of the issues, and trade liberalization second. And we engaged in GATT, and in 1982, the first attempt to launch a round of negotiations under GATT to open the market for services and close the market for intellectual property, for knowledge, was the first attempt in a ministerial meeting. And in 1984 as well, and finally in 1986, Uruguay round was launched in Uruguay, of course, in Latin America. And from there, the opening of the market and the decline of industrial policies started. So because the belief was that the market would help countries to develop. But now, so 30, 40 years later, it happened the opposite. Now we don't have industries to compete, while at the same time, developed countries didn't stop with their policy with their policies to support the industry, the technological ones, and mainly the technological ones, which are now that have more added value that are very, very, very important for the development. And it's part of the war in between China and the US. So my reflections now, I think the reflection now is that, okay, the promises made to the developing world in WTO didn't work. And it didn't work, but the worst scenario was the developed countries did not comply with the rules that were settled, that were written by all of us. So we are not way behind without industry, no industry. So now we're trying to go to a second round or a second era to try to develop new industrial policies. But it's more difficult because the industry were destroyed. At least this is the case with Colombia, and this is the case of many of Latin American countries and many African states. We lose our policies, we lose our plans. And just to finish with these ideas, just to start this conversation. Now, so what is the game for us? We're in the WTO system. What is for us if we allow to get together or to agree with the developed countries for a new exception of the WTO to put all those monies, all those subsidies which are based in WTO rules for their industrial policies, for their own interests. I can understand the interest of the United States, China, the fight that they have among them to control the world technologies. I can understand that. But where the developing countries stand in this fight among them. That's basically what I wanted to share with this conversation. Thank you so much.
That's excellent, Jose. Thank you so much. So I think you all understood in this panel, we've tried to interrogate the idea from various perspectives, which are, of course, interrelated. Industrial policy, and Jose explained very clearly that there's a failure, the WTO failed somehow, the GATT and the WTO failed developing countries in luring them the idea, or with the idea that industrial policy didn't matter, while actually bigger country, and we're thinking also of Europe, US, but also China, did not renounce on the contrary, they had very strong industrial policies. That's something we have in mind. And without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to Suresh now for a short introduction himself and just to set the scene, not the whole presentation, but really setting the scene. I know you have prepared a PowerPoint, but it's not necessarily just Suresh. Just set the scene and the main message you would like to give to everyone, and then we move back to the content.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, I'll make it short, and will I have the 10 minutes later on? Okay, great. So basically, where are we now? In which continent in Asia? Yeah. So obviously, you're going to see from the Asian experiences, exemplified by the regional institutions here, Asian Development Bank, AIIB, and New Development Bank. So we've got three. We only had one before, but in the past 10 years, we got two others. Those are the linchpin in terms of the movement forward and what is that movement forward, and the questions that we we here would be like, is multilateralism there or not there? And we go fast forward to June 2025, what is called a SIEL document, and I just take it from there, and that's what we do.
You should say a few words about yourself, baby, because maybe not everybody.
I'm Suresh Nanwani. I'm from Durham University, professor in practice at Choukroune University, I'm a emeritus professor, and I'm basically a lawyer in training, but I've moved on. I take on different hats. I realize being a lawyer is just one part of the equation, and along the way, it's not just law. And as we all know, there's so many concerns, geopolitical concerns, etc. But I'm a lawyer, and it's my duty, and I'm really happy to connect with you. Thank you. And I love SIEL. It's been part of me for the past 15 years, and I really enjoyed having it. So happy to work out. Thank you.
Excellent. So you understood as well that we have some sections of the discussion dedicated to the role of development banks. And this is a good transition to pick up to Harrison. Harrison, could you introduce yourself and briefly your team?
Yes, thank you so much, Leïla, for setting up the panel and for accepting me to join up, even though a bit late. My name is Mbori. I'm currently based at the University of Luxembourg as a postdoctoral fellow. I normally work on sub-regional courts in Africa, their role in the settlement of investment disputes. But for this session, I have been recently working on the African Development Bank, a different project, and that's what I'm going to present to you about today. The project first was mainly focused, and is still mainly focused on the energy sector, but I realized that there is very little dedicated legal, international economic law, dedicated research on African financial institutions and even the African Development Bank itself. So I think for this session, let me just give two introductory remarks like you've requested. The first remark is, what is my argument? My argument is that the bank, the African Development Bank, which I will tell you a little bit about, is propagating a neoliberal agenda of privatization. And I am happy that we have already had a little bit about privatization from Manuel and this idea of neoliberalism. And I'm not just using it as a buzzword. And I'm focusing especially on the arm of neoliberalism that deals with privatization. As I see it, the idea of neoliberalism for me has three arms or three angles. The first one is privatization, then there's liberalization and deregulation. This work that I'm mainly focusing on touches on this area of privatization. So I'm saying that the bank, at least in its policies, and this is different from the structure. I am a bit of a fan of the structure of the bank, and I am a bit of a critic about the policies of the bank. So this argument focuses on the policy of the bank, which says that the bank's policies of late have been ones that are leading towards the surrendering the pace and nature of the transformation of development to private capital. And this is characterized by the systemic legitimization of the privatization of public goods, be it water, be it transportation, be it energy, and I will talk about the five sort of areas that the bank is focusing on. The other remark, which is my final introductory remark, is I have taken a little bit seriously this idea of de-risking from critical financial work, especially from the work of a scholar in the UK called Daniela Gabor. And this idea of de-risking developmentalism, which she has been able to develop very strongly, and define it as, this is the idea where development is, the policies of development enlist private capital into achieving public policy priorities. What does this in practice involve? It involves tinkering with the risk returns in private investment, in sovereign bonds, in currency, social infrastructure, including schools, roads, hospitals, and houses. and most recently with green industries. What this has led to is that the private finance has taken over public goods to the detriment of the development of most of the countries, not just in Africa, but in the global south. Let me stop there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Harrison, because I think you're creating linkages between all our presentation and indeed the role of privatization, financialization, de-risking in making us believe that the state can be replaced somehow by a private sector. This is something we see all the time. Sustainability, particularly. So I think we're going to have time to discuss that further, of course. And I'd like to give the floor to BonnyLove, because BonnyLove, your topic very much relates to what Harrison just said. So if you could just introduce yourself. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak about the topic. My name is BonnyLove, and I'm a researcher at Portsmouth. I took research to the intersection of international investment. The intersection of international investment law and climate change, and basically looking at how states should align their investment laws and policies. For today's session, I will be talking about the critical role of foreign direct investment in financing development in Africa. And briefly, I just want to set the scene for my presentation, or just make a few remarks and highlight the financing gap, which is very staggering. We're talking about 1.3 trillion dollars annually. So the key message for Africa is we need to find innovative and sustainable financing solutions to fill this gap. So the question is, where are we going to get this money from, away from the usual financing, traditional financing mechanism, like loans. I think for now, I'll just stop with that. And, Fantastic. Thank you so much, BonnyLove. So again, fascinating, because you've just mentioned an expression we hear all the time, the financing gap. Well, relevant to climate change, and you'll see I'll talk about that myself. I'm going to talk about blue finance being an expression of sustainable finance targeted towards the blue economy, the use of water resources. So do you really need this money? That's going to be my question to you. And is there really a financing gap, or is it yet again another iteration of the financialization, of the privatization? I'm going just to say a few words about what I'm going to address briefly later. I'd like to interrogate first the idea of development. What are we talking about? Development suppose a sort of a process, something which brings out the potential of the resource, if you wish, but it also says that you move from underdevelopment, if not backwardness, towards something different, right? So, and development has never been very smooth. It's always been punctuated by violence, by urbanization, by subjugation. So this is also something we need to interrogate, and it's something which has been interrogated quite largely in social sciences. But development is coming back into the picture with the idea of sustainable development, which is now shared by the developing and the developed world. So this is something I'll discuss with you further in a few minutes from the perspective of financialization and economy. So I think the scene has been set quite nicely by all the panelists. I'd like to go back to Jose for maybe more substantial remarks on your topic, industrialization, the lack of or the return of industrialization in Latin America.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Let's do one thing. One. There is a financial gap also in Latin. I don't know how much, but it's a huge need of capital. The capital either two ways, either by foreign direct investment or financial by financial institutions. Secondly, the question of development. It could be different things for different people, different politicians. But for some people from the first world, it's developed to have work, to have education. I mean, the minimal things. When I go to many countries in Latin America, here in Asia. You see a lot of poverty. Lack of education, lack of health, lack of work. People need income. At least we will need to give people the minimum. It's the minimum. Just give him a roof where to stay, give him food to feed 3 times a day at least. In our countries, in my country, some people do not eat 3 times a day. It's just once or twice. It's lucky. 30% of the population. People die of diseases that would be easy to kill, but still dying. So for us, we need to develop somehow to give everyone the minimum, and then work. And how we can give work if the industries do not settle in our countries, if we lose the capacity to produce goods, services in our countries. So that is a question. And then we think, so what would be way forward? What could be the way forward? Industries, it's not easy anymore. Because in other places they are more efficient. So there is and who or what sectors would you protect to gain development? I mean, I have more questions than answers, but these are the things that we keep thinking about. This government that we have right now in Colombia sent a new proposal for the policy of reindustrialization. And it's trying to focus on development on bioscience research. I don't know how it works, but it could be space where our countries could support a little. But it wouldn't be enough. I'm sure. It wouldn't be enough. I'm quite sure. So with this, I will stop here.
Thank you so much, Jose. And I think we'll get back to that. And you'll tell us maybe how possibly Colombia is going to reindustrialize, and if there are plans now and guidelines. Thank you. Suresh, I think you have prepared a nice presentation. Do you want to show it, or is that all right to talk like that?
I think we're spending one week. That's what I'm. Okay, yeah, that's good. I think you can just take it from me. So the first slide is what you see who I am, and that's it. Move on to the second slide. That's what I'm going to focus on, and then the third slide is thank you. So let me go back to the second slide. That's what we need to look at. Okay. I've got 10 minutes. I'm just going to make it short and sharp. Yeah. Okay. What have we got here? So the topic that I'm talking about is very clear. It's on ADB and other Asian experiences and methods for financing development. That's what I'm talking about. Now, I've worked in ADB for many years in the bank, and so working with other MDBs, including AfDB, etc., and that's where commonality comes from. There's so much to cover here, but I'm talking of the Asian experiences. Yeah, that's not grandstanding. Only reasons because if you want to know a bit of Asia, it's really a huge chunk of the world, and it's really important. And here, significantly, we are in Asia. So, okay. What gives? Let's go back to history. History is so important. So we go back to 1944.
Bretton Woods, yeah? And that's where you have the birth of multilateralism, as it were, generated by US and UK and a few others. And at that time, we, meaning many countries in the world, weren't independent enough, weren't part of the infrastructure in terms of the financial architecture. So that's 1944. Let's move on from the Asian perspective. We've got ADB, Asian Development Bank. There are 4 regional development banks, as you may well know. African, and I'm just thinking out here, African, and then you've got Asian and Inter-American. So Jose right there, that's it. So you can see a spectrum of us here. And then you've got European. Leïla is from UK, but let's say European, okay. And that's the latest kid on the block, 1990, fall of the Soviet Union, yeah? And the demise of communism, at least in many countries. And then now, okay, then you have a new development bank coming on in 2015, and then AIB 2016. So you've got like, wow, in 1 decade, 2 new development banks coming up. That's really great. And they are regarded as development banks. I'll touch on them presently when you have MDB statements. They figure there, yeah? 10 MDBs, we will see those prepared. So they are there on the map. And then now, what has changed 17 years on? I'm just going to give you a glimpse. Yeah? I'm looking at a crystal ball. It's always good to see what's there. I mean, some of us are newcomers here. That's fine. What do we take from this session? Okay, ADB, really hierarchical in the sense like AfDB, etc. I'm not saying it pejoratively, but that's the old regime. Yeah? And you have this new regime because it's really interesting when you have the NDB and EIB one membership, ADB, you know, that traditional donor, donee, developing, yeah? So you have that. So you've got China, India as developing countries, yeah? And they are not donors, they're donees, yeah? Change of the other bit, you talk of NDB and AIB, let's talk of AIB, really interesting. A smattering of member countries at the beginning, and now like whoosh, it's like 100 and something, yeah, a force to be reckoned with. ADB is just 69, think of that, 100 something, and you have just 69 there. Not that membership by itself means something, but it does tell you something, how it's really come up to the scale, yeah. And then you have NDB, nothing to blow about, this is about less than 10, that's okay. Why? NDB is so interesting. It is new development bank. You don't have a developed member country there. No, forget it. It's just developing countries. And those developing countries, India, China, South Africa, and then you have Brazil. Guess what? They are both, they are members, they are shareholders, they are donors, and they are borrowing countries. Different landscape, yeah? So you have the presidency rotating amongst the original founding member countries. That's again interesting. Why? Because when you talk of presidency, in the case of ADB, it's typically from one country. And when you talk of World Bank, it's one country. 5 guesses, no prize. Now it's interesting. It rotates. Think of the democratization there, yeah? And then you have also now, in terms of board of directors. That's very important because they're the ones who initiate the policies, approve projects. They're really important. So the board of directors in NDB and AIB is unique. It goes with their core values, lean, green, and the board of directors is non-resident. It means a lot. It's moving in the times, yeah? The others, no, they are resident. And then you have the next one, which is the president, as I mentioned to you. AIB is really interesting. It actually says the person, the president, will be national of regional member country. Now, it doesn't say for all countries, but regional. There is democratization of space. That's very significant. In the case of AfDB, I mentioned you as well, it's the founding member countries. Yeah? Control is vested by those 5, and then they've added on like 3 or 4, Bangladesh, UAE, and the list is growing gradually. Yeah. Core values, as I mentioned, it's really interesting. Core values of ADB and AfDB, 5 pillars, you know, that kind of thing, which Harrison will talk about. But here the core values are lean, agile, and fit for purpose. You know, like, wow, what is this? But that's what it is, and it's enshrined in the charter, yeah? Or if not, the presidents have actually articulated it. Now, methods of operation, AIB, unique. No country strategies. Whereas the other development banks, they have a country strategy. That's a kickoff. Before you finance development, you need to have a country strategy, and then you move on from there, yeah? That's what I want to highlight here. Prohibited practices, just I could go on for this. Prohibited practices are relating to fraud and corruption. Yeah. So the big MDBs, the World Bank, the 4 major ones, they have all come up with this prohibited practices. Corruption is bad, corruption is a cancer, everything negative about corruption. So you've broken it down to prohibited practices, of which there are 4, like, you know, corruption, pollution, etc. AIB, interesting, it is actually saying, well, let's have a few others. They've got obstruction, theft, etc. So they think differently. They're not a member of that agreement, what is called the agreement to say cross-department. So assuming I am AIB, African Development Bank, and then you have European Bank, World Bank, if you have been engaged in a prohibited practice like fraud, or corruption, you as a bidder cannot participate in any of our activities. That's a debarment. And that can be 1 month to permanent, yeah? But NDB has not joined it because of the later on in time, this was in 2010, but they say we will follow when we want to follow, but that's okay. The difference is there. AIB said, we voluntarily take this agreement. So you see the way they're adapted to that. Now, I now come on to the next one, which is the Asian Development Experiences mirrors other NDBs. They're very much international players. So if you see the COP, every year, whenever it has that conference, which is really grueling, right? You get weather and you get everyone coming on board and lots of things. MDBs issue a statement, and it's just 10 MDBs. And the 10 MDBs would include the 4 regional World Bank and AIB and MDB, plus others like Islamic Development Bank. Yeah. So they come up with that statement. That's what I want to be very clear about. And then you have, interestingly, in 2025, 10 MDBs, including ADB, AIB, MDB, they reaffirm their commitment to working as a system to deliver greater impact and scale in line with two notes. One is Viewpoint Note 2024 and the G20 Roadmap 2024. And that's really significant because they're trying to say they're going to reform their processes one way or the other. There's a list of actions that they're going to do. And then in June 2025, President Day, just last month, you've got the survey document. So it's a global promise to fix how the world supports countries as they climb up the ladder. Now, in the remaining time I have left, I'm going to touch on number 5, the highlights. Yeah, one is, as we all know, US was not involved; it's not part of the equation. Yeah, so that's so significant. And then you've got the survey document saying, well, you know, the UN folks say multilateralism is not that. I leave to you, is it that or not? That's really interesting. A lot of rhetoric, a lot of more rhetoric, because you have rhetorics like money trucks. Private sector is the engine of growth. Then you've got financing is the engine of development. Like, what really is it? Yeah. And then you've got multilateralism. Is it really that or not? You have geopolitical concerns, which is very valid, and that's not there. They don't articulate that. But you get also Brazil, you get also Spain, and one more country saying, we're going to now have a new system to see how we can tax the rich, because it's time the rich needs to be taxed. How can you have a system where, the rich, it's just like 98%, and, like something is wrong with this equation. I think we've got a long way to go through that. And then, of course, the burning topics on climate change, they're all there. How much MDBs should do in the certain document and how much needs to be done. The debate is far from over. I think if anything, it started. Why? SDGs, ambitious goals. You remember that, SDGs? The document said ambitious goals. When you even had the documents before, they had those documents to say, we're going to have the G8 and all those documents. Every time it was ambitious, and now again it's ambitious. Like, can we see how much is ambition really serving us in the purpose? Yeah. Are we going to talk very ambitious goals, and what's going to happen after that? And then I end on that note. Thank you.
Suresh, that was excellent again, and it's really good. When I hear words like lean, agile, and fit for purpose, I'm always quite scared because I feel like hearing the European Commission or my university management to justify some cuts. So I think we also have to reflect upon these words and indeed, what exactly have they done, these banks? Because have they created more money and so more debt, or have they really pure development in a good way?
Yeah, I laugh at that term. Well, I don't laugh in a bad way. SEAL of Goods Act 1893, the SEAL of Goods Act in 1893 in the UK talks of fit for purpose, right? We all know that from school days. And then now we're talking about fit for purpose. Like, look at that cliche. And if that's one thing I try and avoid cliches, yeah. But you're spot on. Thank you.
We'll talk about that in a few minutes during the discussion, but there are loads of cliches in all these documents and manifestos. Harrison, is a good transition. I think you also have prepared a nice presentation. Would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, so thank you. I have already covered a few parts of my presentation in the intro, so I won't take a lot of time on that. I will just move on to the next slides, which is to give you a very quick intro on the history and the. So just before I get there, maybe let me tell you about this because it's part of my argument. What is fiscal de-risking? Because this is very important. There are many types of this de-risking model, as you can see. In fact, there are 10 different ones. I just gave you 3 on this slide. But the one I focused on more is this idea of fiscal de-risking, which is the idea that we do public-private partnership, PPPs, which is also now becoming a cliche, now that we've been talking about cliches, in social energy infrastructure. And what does this do? This shifts demand to political or climate risk from the private sector to public balance sheets with a profound distributional consequence, and it commodifies and privatizes public goods. And this is where the big problem is when we're talking about what are the dangers of public-private partnerships, which are product of neoliberalism from the UK and then transported or transposed to different parts of the world. Then the next part is just what is the structure and history of the AfDB. I think this is important for us. A few important points is that its history founded in 1963, and the desire is to have an equal voting rights, i.e. move from the Bretton Woods World Bank system where we have weighted voting and have a system which a bank that is for Africans where they can vote equally and where they can decide their destiny in. I think that's the idea. In fact, it has a very idealistic Pan-African stance. But then when it gets to 1982, things are so tough that they decide, okay, we don't have enough money to fund our own bank ourselves. And here is where we get this idea of regional and non-regional members. And this becomes a big issue. So now, as the bank stands, we have regional members, 54 African states, which you'll see here, and then saying they're the main borrowers anyway. they are the regional members, and then now we have non-regional members, and this begins in 1982. The structure of the bank is historical. You have the African Development Bank, the ADB, the African Development Fund, and the Nigerian Trust Fund, which is the three sort of different arms of the bank. The voting system is also important. There is a 60 to 40% vote split, and this is by treaty. So there's no way that this 40% will ever go higher than here, because the African states have decided that they want to maintain control of the voting system. Otherwise, you will have a system where the non-regional members will be able to basically take over the bank. And this is not just me, saying it. Look at how it looks if we're talking about voting rights. In the AfDB, the highest voting right is Nigeria is at the top, but the rest, the next voting right member is Germany, the US, and then African states appear, and not even much, because by the time you get to the 10 countries, the only ones that are Africa are Nigeria, Egypt, South Africa, Algeria, and that's it. I mean, there's something that Mark says, you have to think about that. And if you just let the non-regional members then have all the voting rights, then we are back to the World Bank system and the bank is taken over. And for me, this is why I think the structure of the FDB is important in terms of how it has been set up. And I did this slide to make a comparison with other banks, but it's 10 minutes, guys. It's not so much time. This also goes to part of what Jose Manuel had spoken about. What are the things we want for development? This is the structure of what we want for development for Africa. We want to light up Africa according to the FDB. We want to feed Africa. We want to industrialize Africa. We want to integrate Africa and improve the quality of life of the people of Africa. Those are the sort of the 5 main pillars that the FDB is looking for. And I think these are really important things for Africa. And there is huge need for funding to do these 5 important things, and that is what the FDB is sort of trying to do. I think this goes to what they've called the high fives for development, completed in 2023 as a policy instrument. Okay, focusing just on the energy sector, which is what I was focusing on, I want to give you the examples of what I think is then the privatization agenda. And here I see a couple of things happening. If you go to the FDB's energy sector policy of 2015, you'll see a couple of words there that for me make me worried, and sort of you can see the problem of how this privatization of finance becomes in. Sometimes it's called, blended, finance, where you want to bring public finance together with private finance. So you can see some of the things that the policy instrument says is that we want to remove barriers to private sector participation in the energy sector and foster public-private partnerships. PPPs appears again. What do we want to do again? We want to enhance collaboration between private investors and public sector in energy subsectors where there are limits to private sector participation. Again, huge de-risking policies, i.e. ensure that the role of the government is to sort of accompany private capital, make it easier for private capital to come. This is exactly the idea of de-risking. Make it very easy for as much as possible private capital to enter into the system. I think again here is the policy, again, just the New Deal on energy in Africa, again, just emphasizing public-private partnerships as our innovative, I don't know the people who have seen the dangers of this in Europe and from the UK. Yeah, when they say this, what they think, because we're being told this is innovative, and there's a lot of literature that I've already said, In fact, in France, in terms of sovereign debt, it was called a sovereign debt time bomb, this idea of public partnerships. And this was in the French Senate that it was discussed. So there's a lot that is happening there. Let me give 3 examples to end my presentation so that you see the dangers that come from this. The first example here is what is happening in my country, Kenya. There's a huge project called the Turkana Wind Power Project in Kenya, which has been lauded as Africa's largest wind farm. And it has been developed for a while now. PPP. So the FDB is happy. Private capital is accompanying public capital. But look at what happened. I think 2 years ago, there was litigation over the title to the land where this wind farm project stands, and the court found in favor of the indigenous communities who are living in the area, i.e., the process of getting title to this land was fraudulent. And the people who suffered were the indigenous community where this land is based. And this is an externality, but you have to think about, how much are we just not, we're sort of de-risking completely that we're not even checking what are the dangers for indigenous communities, what will happen to the people who live on this land. Some of them are displaced. I know that one trained scholar called Balakrishnan Rajagopal, who's in the US at MIT, has called this the violence of development. And then the Grand Inga Dam project, which is still a project, which is supposed to be maybe one of the biggest energy producing dams in Africa. And South Africa is very much interested in this because they were hoping that if this dam is developed, then this will help them to deal with the energy crisis that has been going on in South Africa. And the idea was to make it the largest in the world. And FDB supported this project. And as a result of them pushing the neoliberal privatization agenda, what happened is that there's still been a lot of delays, there have been cost overruns, and there's even on this one been social opposition. Again, this comes up in this. So the idea here is that we have a model that relies on attracting investors, and we don't take care to look at the project viability, which is prioritized over its sustainability. And I'm not using here the sustainability as a buzzword. I'm giving you an example where if sustainability is not taken very seriously, communities are going to be affected, the livelihoods of people are going to be affected. And I've looked at other studies on this damming of Africa, where sometimes the energy is mainly supposed to power industrialization or take energy to a place where an industry is, and the communities where the lines are passing do not even get the electricity. So you sometimes wonder. I have 1 minute left and one example to give. This example is, interesting. This is the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which is now supposed to be in full capacity very soon. And the financialization of this was interesting because Egypt and the US have blocked Ethiopia from getting funds, a direct funding on developing this. And Ethiopia was determined to do this. And they came up with very innovative ways, including, what they call the Millennium Bonds. And the dam has now been developed. And the FDB, to some extent, supported this process because, again, there was a lot of money that was coming out of the salaries or the pay slips of Ethiopians themselves to support this huge national project. But if you follow carefully, this has now created a huge, I think, geopolitical crisis because of Egypt and Sudan have raised serious question about the effectiveness of de-risking in managing cross-water disputes. Because when you de-risk, you don't ask the question, how has the Nile been used by the other states, that is Sudan and Egypt? And Egypt's lifeline is literally the Nile. I think that if the Nile they don't get enough water, it's literally saying that the Egyptians might not be able to survive. So I understand what they want, and yet I also understand the Ethiopians, they want to get this energy. In fact, they're so excited now that it's about to start that they are exporting some of this energy to Tanzania, and they have already signed a deal with Kenya where Kenya will transmit this energy into Tanzania. And both Kenya and Ethiopia and Tanzania are happy, while Egypt is saying there's a huge problem. I'll stop there. 1 minute over time, thanks.
That's fine. Fascinating, Harrison. Thank you so much. Of course, development is never smooth. It's forced upon us sometimes. And you have given excellent examples, the damming of Africa, which is something to reflect upon. BonnyLove, I think you're going to follow up on the same from climate perspective. Thank you very much. I think Harrison has pretty much said everything. And this brings me to the issue of the challenges related to foreign direct investment. These are some of the negative impacts. What is the benefit for the local communities? The local communities ideally should benefit from investment at the most impacted, most affected
And we increasingly see cases of climate change mitigation or incidences where local communities are protesting these investments because of these impacts, human rights violations. And we've seen in the DRC and other parts of Africa, like Nigeria, where we've had issues of environmental harms by big multinationals like Shell. So it brings me to the words of Mo Ibrahim. We should not sacrifice our climate or invest or our environment for development. So the development is coming at a huge cost. And the question is, are we ready? What are the interventions with our African states? And this brings me to some of the key considerations in this regard. We need to improve our governance and regulatory reforms to sort of promote sustainable investment. And I also see the AfSTAR, the African Continental Free Trade Area, as an opportunity to drive regional cooperation and harmonization at the continental level. So we must improve governance to protect the environment, and the goal is to become very competitive as a continent. Yeah, I think that's pretty much.
Thank you so much, BonnyLove, for being sharp and concise. We'll talk again about the impact of investment as another way of financing development and the impact on the local communities. Very briefly, before we open the floor to discussion, I'd like to tell you a few words about this blue financing I mentioned before. So I'll start with the Washington consensus, because Suresh, but also Jose alluded, and of course Harrison alluded to that. So since 1989, when actually John Williamson coined the term Washington consensus, you heard this expression quite a lot, and I think he himself would be surprised to see that it has become either an oxymoron or a battle cry for ideological disputes. So we don't really know what it covers, and yet at the same time we do. At the time it was created for Latin America as a sort of guideline, as a sort of recipe, and it was relatively straightforward. It was a sort of blueberry for market-driven economies. It was a list of things to do and things not to do, and it relates to our field very directly because, for instance, the idea was to generate more bilateral investment treaties, for instance. But of course, it has then been interpreted differently, but generally it relates to the work of these banks, these development banks, and the idea of privatization and having a view in the economy. So today, in this context, we see a new iteration of the same idea with blue or sustainable finance, I should say, and then blue finance. Blue finance is a new derivative of sustainable finance or green finance that maybe some of you have heard about, designed to support the blue economic transition, so transition towards a more sustainable management of water resources, including oceans, but including as well fresh waters, and all that for economic growth, job creation, improved livelihood, sustainable ecosystem, aquatic health, and so on and so forth. It relates to the SDG 14, life below water. The term blue economy, you might know, was originally coined by Belgian economist Gunther Pauli in his book, The Blue Economy, 10 Years, 100 Innovation, 100 Million Jobs. So you see the narrative is always the same. Privatization, innovation, job creation, right? And the expression was soon adopted by the European Union a few years later and the United Nations for Sustainable Development in Rio 2012. And since that time, we hear a lot about the blue economy, notably in the context of the ocean decay, the UN ocean decay 21-2030. So the problem is always the same. We are told that we need to achieve sustainable economy and blue economy. This is really important, but we lack finance. And as usual, we say that this SDG 14 is the less funded SDG, and that we need a massive amount of money to do that. This is a discourse which has been, taken and by the World Bank and many other regional banks. So how are we going to achieve that? Well, knowing or learning from green finance, we actually propose exactly the same that we have done for green finance. green financing to proceed in finance nearly by 2 decades. So we have been hearing and doing green finance for nearly 30 years now. And the first institution at the origin of this initiative was UNEP. UNEP and its finance initiative, UNEP FI. It had connected the UN with financial institutions from around the world to shape, I quote, sustainable finance agenda, and it was founded in 1992, so it's quite a while ago. It has been emulated by numerous regional professional organizations, and as a matter of fact, today, for instance, we have 500 banks and insurers worldwide with assets exceeding 170 trillion, which are implementing UNEP finance principles for responsible banking and sustainable insurance. So again, we're talking about international institutions and private institutions, banks and insurers in particular. So based on these models for the past, let's say, 10 years, we have actually an explosion of initiatives from banks, regional and world banks, in particular, in the domain of finance. You have a number of frameworks which have been published by, as I said, UNEP Finance, but also the World Bank and the IFC, which are very much leading in terms of regulating the finance area. But we also have regional finance initiatives as well. We have the AfDB, for instance, which has adopted relatively similar guidelines. We have also banks like, well, in Indonesia, you have the Indonesian National Development Planning Agency, for instance, BAPENAP, adopting exactly the same. We have banks or in the Caribbean. We have also European institutions. The thing is that very often these multilateral banks are very much influenced by private initiative. For instance, the International Capital Market Association, which has released in 2021 the Sustainability Bonds Guidelines. So this is for the guidelines. Of course, the picture is slightly more complex than what I can say in a few words, but this is the idea that you have multilateral banks and private organizations publishing these guidelines in coordination. Now, what about the tools? The tools are very similar to those of green finance and similar to the tools used by multilateral banks, generally speaking. We're talking about loans and we're talking about bonds. Nothing new under the sun. Loans, you know very well what we're talking about. Bonds, this is the fancy mechanism, which is again not particularly new, but you have had a number of blue bonds issued for the past 5 to 10 years, with the Seychelles bond being the first one. The problem here again is exactly the same, is that countries are generating more debts to achieve sustainable goals. So we haven't changed the recipe, but we have changed somehow the discourse, which eventually leads to taking debt rather than achieving more sustainable projects. So that's really, really, in a nutshell, what I wanted to tell you. But I'm sure we have more questions and more comments. I think you all understood how all these topics relate to each other. If you have any more comments or anything you would like to add about industrial policy.
Paying attention to this, but I don't know what else could I say. But because, yeah, of course, it's we are all these things that we have been talking about, they're so close to nature. There are so many links, so many commonalities, which is one, the need for development. Developing countries. Secondly, resources, basically the ones, and the questions remain. What? Because I want to point out one thing. Is that in general, the policies are or their general ideas, some kind of rhetorics. And said, okay, how can we learn this idea? Because they are in a plane going very high, very common. These ideas are pretty common. It's do sustainable development and look after local communities. But we also need money on which industries, what business should the state protect or develop. And in general, we all know all these things, but practice, the question is, how can you land that thing into our context? And that was one of the problems that I saw Financialization, and that's it. How Colombia tried to do it, and it didn't, I mean, it has a good plan in theory, and it has all the stuff that you, as an academic, you would like to see, and I like it very much. But after, you need, the state needs to pick something, and the question is, which ones? And what Colombia said in the every 4 years after the new president is elected, the president presents a law that's called the National Development Plan. And it is more or less the roadmap that it will, the president will like to follow. And what this is the reindustrialization further. And two main sectors were in the mind of the government. One, biotech investments for biotech in agriculture. Secondly, biotech for pharmaceutical industries, local pharmaceutical industries, or regional pharmaceutical industries in biotech. And I work in the second one because I've been working, I have worked for the pharmaceutical industry, the generic industry in Colombia. I do as well work with access to medicines. The prices of pharmaceutical medicines in Colombia are so high when they have patents and protection, so I work with NGOs to try to. But those sectors were two of the best of Colombia. And you need, for both of them, you need private sector to be honest, because the government doesn't know exactly what to do. Or in each particular step, look at which medicine, which agricultural products are you want to do you want to provide more support. But what I've seen is that the private sector refrains to invest in at least in this sector. It's very hesitant. So even the government wants to give them some protection, perhaps, money, policies. And one of the when I asked to the pharmaceutical industry in Colombia, what they are not taking this opportunity to grow and say, they said, no, there are a lot of risk certainties in this business. We need bigger markets because nowadays the investments are so huge, and with our markets that are so small, we cannot, the risk is too big, and we need to expand the market. And in these two industries, there are a lot of barriers in American countries and bigger barriers, of course. To try to export the medicine to the United States is almost impossible. I remember I did a study many years ago, and from Latin American countries to those countries, it is not a multinational pharmaceutical company that is settled in less developed countries. There is no way that you can. There isn't. So those are the problems that we face. And some of the problems that I face. So my question is, what has to be done? So I don't know exactly how to respond. Yeah, thank you.
So much for responding that quickly and again so precisely. Well, there's something you said which I think was very interesting. How to localize somehow these great policies and plans for the world. This is a criticism which is often formulated by developing countries. It's so nice to have your new policy economy, but how do I do that? Yes, and another thing you mentioned, which I think was very important, local champions. Something in China has done very well, for instance, in the past 40 years, the creation of local champions, which are able to compete with the Americans. Any comments on what Jose just said, or any questions from the floor? I think it's time to open the questions. Yeah, Emmanuel.
So what is the question? I found it interesting. Points that Harrison made, whiskey. And when I looked at the slide, what is being done and being taken in whiskey, I think what I see there is risk shifting. And that is the comes from the process of the process is to shift risks from the private sector to the public sector. So basically it becomes government takes the risk. And if that is what they're doing, then huge risk for a huge disaster. The Asian financial crisis of 1997, which then spilled over into Argentina. I think Argentina is still suffering from that. In a way, it also kind of spilled over into Russia, with the collapse of military capital, which come across the terrible in Russia as well. It's also because Friday, as my good friend, mentor, Rosberg would say, it is toward the rich borrow and the poor pays. Money goes to the big ones, the capitalists, but when the trouble hits, governments, they need to adapt. And then when that happens, the first thing IMF comes say, you need to restructure your health, education. And so basically those who consume the consumers of public goods, such as especially the food, this how the very real of economy going down that path, it is a huge mistake. And lose the problems.
Yes, maybe I can say something that I think I like the way Emmanuel has also sort of used the terms. I think it's so much the same idea of de-risking, risk shifting. The private sector prefers de-risking more because if they use risk shifting, it will look bad with them. So it's about the labeling. So it's cool how you label them also helps you. And I think also governments might find de-risking more neutral than risk shifting because it might people will quickly ask, so who are you shifting the risk to? And if the public know that the risk is being shifted to the public budget line, then it becomes problematic. That's my first point. The second point is what really is happening from the governmental point of view. What really is happening from the governmental point of view is that you're removing the debt that you're lending from the public ledger, at least at the time when the money is coming in, and then it comes up later. This is exactly what a PPP is, if you want to look at it from a financial point of view, is that at the time when the money is being borrowed, the government, you do not see the money in the public ledger, in the debt of the government, but that payment is going to come up later. Either the public itself is going to pay at some point because you have to pay for these projects, whether you like it later, or you're going to have a toll system where, again, still the public is going to pay. So it's true that we are technically borrowing the money and we don't see it in the budget at the beginning. We can't see it, and this is very good for the government because you're not going to show that you have any deficit at the time of the borrowing. The IMF is going to be happy with you, but it is going to catch up with you at the end of the day.
Yeah, so thank you for the reflections on parents. To say, Harris, maybe in general, expression. I think for Harris, you probably know, interested in work in this area, not just because of the financial architecture part, but because of the PPP part. As a practitioner, I know projects, and not just advice, just investors, PPP projects for the sector in Nigeria. So I understand the academic, questions we are asking whether we call it risky or anything else. But a project finance lawyer will look at this and say, what is he talking about? Right? Because this is primarily actually no shifting risk. So anybody's actually making sure the partner who is best managing risk takes it. So in your project document, you already have that's the initiative that say, if the government fails to deliver the land, then they are the one who is at fault. And the World Bank requirements actually shows that that should be a pre-disbursement process that should have been taken. And it is not uncommon during that process for disputes already be triggered, right? And notice is given that delay is already happening because the government is not making the land available as early as possible, right? So I think for the first question I'll ask, I'm interested in if there's time, in a little bit more facts around our land dispute, right? Because from listening to you, I'm just like, something is wrong out there. Right? Why is it at the status stage that it has happened? And is it that the case took too long and they continue to invest, that the government was promising that they would be able to resolve it, and so on and so forth, right? The other question that came to my mind on that, on the PPP part, is really that you noted it is not needed. You go to Chile, you go to the US, you go to Mexico, is abound. Joburg, Brazil, they all abound. They are different kinds of questions. It's working in some places, it's not working in some places. But the question is, what is the alternative? Right? I think at some point, we can't say that, we wear the hats of international financial law and say, I know none of you on the panel will say that's bad, right? That's not what we're going to say. So it's the cost of debt, right? That's the issue here. Now, where PPP is designed and investors are equity investors, it's a totally different ballgame. I mean, if the financiers are local banks, it's a totally different ballgame. The project I was almost like that. So I'm getting a little bit into the nitty-gritty now, right? And saying, apart from what I see, quite cautious as the academic, question. That's too much on it. What's the alternative? Where's the funding going to come from to do these very important works? Then to Zimbabwe, I think I hear you on the small market that's available for production of those kind of expensive medicines. Essentially, the research and development costs, right, which is huge to be able to get to where you even produce anything. It's what is the issue. When you get there, you need to continue to innovate. to make it work. So I think, my question in that area for you is, you've done a lot in this area, and I think the what comes before what, right? Is my question here. Have you worked with Colombia, for example, found that there are other areas that the people who are in that industry can capitalize on, right? The language of global value chains is not one that's so associated in pharmaceutical work in terms of the initial processes. But you see other areas where you can play, right? Rather than saying you need to be in this market as the core players in there, right? And I think to Suresh and to BonnyLove and maybe in parts to Leïla, I see the overlaps in all you're saying, and I think for me, whether it's blue, economy, whether it's in the context of just thinking with these banks or thinking about the plight of indigenous peoples and what it's about. I don't know if if it's a position where you look at these days and you say, well, you're changing course in how you do your work. But our governments for the indigenous part now and the new economy, I think are complicit in many of things, right? Also mentioned it, it's not for lack of policy, it's not for lack of any of those fantastic documents that they need. It's just that they've not been able to move past the level of this actually. I'm serious about it. So I wonder if any of your thoughts, right, has gone. I don't have a full picture of Leïla's, right, projects on it. I know this has the development handle, but I'm keen to hear anything on that, right? And I think the similarity between Suresh and Harris's typology of the banks, especially their shareholding, is a very interesting one for even our project, right? On that, at some point we can talk about it. But I do wonder if in your own view, you've seen that technology affecting the Asian development banks, regional development banks, right? I don't know enough about them, but I'm thinking about it functioning now in terms of being effective financiers of, say, investment, trade, infrastructure projects, even more generally. Do you see them as real big-time players, for example, in Asian? Otherwise, thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, DC. I'll be short. The first question you asked is a question of efficiency. So there's the idea that the private sector will deliver more efficiently than the public sector. And I've spoken to also many in-house lawyers do not understand this idea when I try to explain to them that efficiencies can be resolved on either side, i.e. the public sector can deliver efficiently and the private sector can deliver efficiently. And it might be a question of who then should do it. And I think for public goods specifically, the public sector is a much better place to do it. And in most of the countries that I have lived in the global north, I look at electricity in the US delivered by mostly a public utility. And there was a time, especially in the winter in the US, you can't get your electricity cut in Chicago because they know that if they cut your electricity, then you're going to freeze in the cold. And then when the summer months arrive, they come for you and they say, okay, you've not been paying your electricity bill for this number of months. And I see a proportionality view there now that we're talking about proportionality view with Greg yesterday. I don't think the private sector, with its need for profit, and especially the returns and how quickly the returns come, wants to take that risk. And this is why the government is saying, we want to possibly de-risk this for you so that we will not have a system which, for example, will allow parties not to have electricity for certain months for whatever reason. You run the electricity, you can, and water is another one. I mean, it is the questions of efficiency cannot just be looked at from a financial based type of efficiency, but also the specific product that we are looking at. And if you add the issue of contingent liabilities onto this, because most of our public sector governments are issuing a lot of guarantees, many guarantees of and there are many things that can happen that are not controlled by the government. The pandemic was a good example. If a government gives guarantees that do not take into account some of this, then the contingent liability will eventually end up on the public ledger. So I understand this, but I think we also need to be careful about who's pushing that specific narrative. And I always really try to think about it also from their point of view, but every time I push the transactional lawyer to be very extreme, it ends up being that I am just doing the transaction. If I really push them to the extreme. So again, I don't think they have also done the weighing and balancing that I think even we as academics have tried to do on that specific question. On the land dispute concern, what happened was that in Turkana, where this is based, this is a very arid area. I.e., you will find the communities moving from one place to the other. But according to the Kenyan constitution, this is community land. The government knew that this is community land. The government alienated this land knowing that it is community land. The government set up the project knowing that it is community land. So the community went to court and said, they did all of this knowingly. I think all the project financiers ought to know. And if someone says they didn't know, I find that I will question. I mean, how did you? Or you ought to have known. You should have looked at the law. You have the best lawyers in the world. They are the ones who are advising you. They're the ones who are telling you these are the problems here that you need to check. And it was easy because when the community went to court, they just said that this land was irregularly acquired, and the court was found in favor very easily. So I think this is not a hard dispute at all. What is the alternative? I think there's still a possibility that public goods can, and we should try as much as possible push for public goods to be delivered by the states as much as possible. And I understand what the issue with Colombia and what was there said, because also for me it's a conundrum. You have a scenario where the government is even willing to de-risk, and even the private sector is saying that is not enough. So you can imagine that's a very tough situation to be in this biotech and pharma situation in Colombia, because even when the government is saying, what do you want? What can you do? What can we do for you? The private sector is still not willing to come on board. And again, I think our problems are very complex, and we should find, always ways of thinking and trying to resolve them in the best ways possible. So I don't know whether I have an answer to the Colombia scenario, because I know you asked then what else can we do? I mean, it's a very tough situation, but I think for countries in Africa, for example, there is still some negotiational space. There is still places where the public or the government can be able to deliver public goods and much more efficiently than the private sector. Yeah.
Thank you. BC, as usual, I expect nothing less from you, and this is fantastic. Your questions are absolutely provoking, and they really generate lots of thought. I just picked out a few that I think are what I can reply to. One is this land dispute that Henderson mentioned. I find it absolutely shocking. I don't know, it just comes to me. I'd like to know more. Was the African Development Bank funding that project? Oh my goodness. Okay, I just can't believe. I teach AfDB. I don't understand. There's such a thing called a project cycle. You do countries agreement, then you have feasibility study. Hello, what went wrong? Issues of accountability and responsibility come to my mind. So I don't know whether it went to the AfDB accountability mechanism. It should have. If it didn't, I don't know why. This would have been an excellent forum to say, what the heck is going on? Why? Bujagali Dam Project, Chief Profile 3, that's in Uganda. Bujagali Dam Project. It was such a disaster. AfDB, World Bank, IFC. Now, what went wrong? Many things went wrong. I just pick out one. Busoga people, who were the people who were having cultural spirits that they want to be appeased. Now, big debate. Who are they? What are they? And in the end, guess what? AfDB did lots of work to see what it could do to get it right together with World Bank. AfDB doesn't have an IP policy, indigenous peoples policy. Hello? And we talk of IPs, indigenous people. Lots of banks have it. It doesn't have. And in the latest 2023 ISS, Integrated Safeguard System, still not there. They've linked it to involuntary resettlement. I don't know. I think it's something that is really cooking and needs to be looked at, but that's fine. You know, MDBs work their own way and they have their own independence and they do their own thing. That's where cooperation comes in. Yeah. Now, we move. So to me, the next one is this anti-corruption you mentioned. I single out one case where a loan project more than $1 billion was given to Bangladesh, and it was found that there was allegation of corruption. What happened? Look, everything got signed. World Bank was the lead. Other players, ISDB and AfDB, JICA, Japan authorities. Bangladesh was given 4 things to check by the World Bank as lead for financier. It only satisfied 2, couldn't satisfy the other 2. All the banks just went through. First time ever, more than $1 billion. Now think in terms of what time was spent, more than 10 years in preparing for this project. All the effort just washed out, yeah. But I thought it was good. If Bangladesh couldn't come up with all the 4 requirements, development banks would say, we don't want our money in because it's not our money, it's taxpayers' money. It affects our reputation. First time ever it happened. But that's a very sad case, but it shows it can work if there's enough grit built into it. Now, the next one I want to go straight, and I think you mentioned, wonderful. Now, you see these development banks, they come in. If you say, was that trade in 1944? No, it was development. I mean, let's face it. Who were the first countries to borrow? First country, anyone with a guess? Who borrowed first from the World Bank? Quick. Sorry? Huh? US? No, of course not. US? No, not US. France, okay? Now, would we have France borrowing now? No, the scene has changed. So let's look at it. You know, I think we should just be patient to say, we don't want to understand the dramatic landscape of the development banks, yeah? That's why I was trying to plot out the uniqueness. AfDB, I don't know why, you rightly said it, right? How can a bank just, AfDB, when it established in the name of Africanization, say, we'll do it all ourselves. And of course, the next thing was after 30 years, 25 years, let's get in regional members to come in to fund us. I don't want to go into that, that says a lot, but it's good. It went through its own phase, yeah? ADB didn't. Straight away, 60-40 applied. No big deal. There's nothing wrong with saying you want foreigners, you want developed countries to come in. It's fine. Even EBRD did the same thing. Guess who are the members now, non-regional members of EBRD? India, China. Look at it. Reverse, yeah? I think it's fantastic. Now, so trade policy, it wasn't there. But times have moved on. Last year, ADB had the DG of the world of WTO coming. And of course, since the 90s with the WTO, MDBs have played consciously to incorporate some kind of trade policy in their systems, how they can address it. Just as they would with ESF, indigenous peoples, and information disclosure. The last one I want to touch is civil society. It's so important. So you've got the Paris Declaration, you've got the Accra Agenda for Action, and the first time ever, it states with MDBs and other organizations, they want to say civil society are important, democratic, important development actors. And everyone acknowledges that. How they acknowledge that is another question, but they need to be giving them space. And the debate is still going on. That's why when you have annual meetings, civil society say, we don't have enough. We need more voice. Sure, they're not funders, they're civil society, but they want to have a say in the process. And I think that's so important, that we should be going by that. It's far from perfect. Development institutions are not perfect. They're just one instrument, yeah? And if you think the World Bank is great, why is it still having evolution that line? Okay, but there it is. But it's great, it's getting there. Either you want to overhaul the system, tell me what you want to replace with, but otherwise you have the existing system and see what needs to be done. Yeah. I end on that. Thank you.
That's fine. Yes, we're going to bring this to just have an illustration very quickly. This is, you were saying, well, the government are also very much responsible, what they do. I don't know whether you heard about the Gabon debt for ocean swaps. So that's a fascinating one, right? So in 2023, Gabon made the headlines for two reasons. One, maybe less famous than the other, but sign a debt for ocean swap, swap through debt. And that was about 500 million worth of debt that was signed with the Nature Conservancy, which is an American organization, which is actually, it's going to be a non-profit, but it's a profit populated by bankers and big fish. And at the same time, the same month, the arrest of the President Ali Bongo on charges of various charges of corruption. And corruption was related to these very ocean debt swaps, right? All right, so I think that was really excellent. I would like to thank the panel members for their really, really interesting presentation and the excellent discussion we had with you and Theogene. So thank you very much, everyone. We'll see you around. And,
動いた。動いた。